Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Zuberbeer, and I am the Education and Instructional Technology Librarian at ECU's Joiner Libraries Teaching Resources Center. And today's session, Choosing and Evaluating Tech Tools, Part 1, will start in a little bit. We've got a few minutes yet, which will give some people some time to join us. So until that time, I will just kind of check in every now and again, but I will share my screen. For my one or two people out there that are coming in and out, can you guys hear me? And if you can hear me, please use today's Meet link that I threw up on the event page for our chat. Let's see here. Let's do that. Wonderful. Oh, sorry, Regina. Can you hear me now? I see you just arrived, but I wasn't talking. We still got a couple minutes yet to wait for some people to show up. So one thing I do, I'm going to try for the first time and see how it works. I'm going to kick you guys to share a Padlet wall. With you guys and see how that where did I go? And on the wall, since today I want to try and focus on tools, on tech tools that kind of hit the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So the knowledge, the comprehension, and apply regions. And so I'm just curious to see what tools you guys use for to hit those objectives, or that you use when you have written objectives that hit those levels of Bloom's taxonomy in your classes. Sorry about this, everybody. I've got one thing I forgot to pull up that I can, my little cheat sheet. I can, Regina, thank you. All right. Now that I've got the now that I got the Padlet wall up there, we can play with that. We'll get to those at the end. And like Regina did, if you can kind of write just a brief little description on how you use it or what you use it. I think that'll help us at the end, and I'm hoping at the end we can talk about some of these tools and give each other some ideas on how we can maybe choose better tools, choose different tools that do the same thing that could be easier to use in the classroom, or use tools that might be better fits for the content that we're covering. And we'll talk about a lot of those different things. Or we can certainly flip through and throw ideas and tools out using the chat feature on today's meet as well. So here I am. We'll get started since we've got a fair amount of stuff to cover. So my name is Dan Zuberbeer. I am the Education and Instructional Technology Librarian at Joyner Library's Teaching Resources Center on the campus of East Carolina University. Welcome. Today, I'll go back to sharing my screen. Today we'll be talking about choosing and evaluating tech tools. Now, I must be honest, when I first thought this up many months ago, and with a part 1 and a part 2, it seemed like a really good idea at the time, focusing on the lower level of blooms in part 1, and then going the upper level of blooms. Create, evaluate, and synthesize. And I apologize with my blooms because I was in the classroom. It was still the old version, and I know with our pre-service teachers here at ECU, they teach them the revised version. So I apologize if I get the terminology mixed up a little bit. So upper level, analyze, evaluate, and create. And what I've come when I did a lot more research on choosing and evaluating tech tools, it's not so much. Thank you. That helps out quite a bit. When it comes to choosing and evaluating tech tools, it's really the same for both. So I think that what's really going to differentiate part 1 from part 2 is at the tail end of the session, where we talk about some specific tools and how we can help each other develop maybe a little bit of an action plan, and develop some questions that we can ask ourselves after we use those tools, or even questions we can ask as we think about choosing a tool to integrate into a lesson or an activity. And so so for the most part, part 2 will probably be pretty much the same as part 1, except for the tail end. But without further ado, let's get into today's objectives. So we're going to quick review of TPACK, asking yourself some initial questions on that you should consider when you're choosing a tech tool to integrate into your classroom. share some specific examples of how to apply TPACK, looking at the remember and understand and apply. Share some examples with, whoops. And it seems as though I forgot to finish my thought there. And at the tail end, we'll share some examples with each other on some tech tools that we do use and how we've integrated it, and then how might we be able to help each other formulate questions or an action plan on how to evaluate those tools that we do use most every day. And then discuss how to evaluate and assess the impact on student learning. So that's the basic gist. So this is what I covered in my last session, integrating tools with TPACK. And that's, I do hesitate to say that last phrase, integrating tools using TPACK, because it's not really a technology integration framework. It's used as a tool in the lesson design process to help teachers integrate technology into their lessons, and then also it's used as a reflective piece when teachers are looking back on their lessons and how they did, and asking themselves, are these tech tools, did it fit with the content, did it fit with my pedagogical strategies and student learning activities that I chose? And the better understanding we have of that, that's the development of your TPACK. And so TPK is appropriate tech to pedagogy, TCK appropriate tech tools for your content that you're covering, PCK appropriate strategies for the content. And as teachers, that PCK is probably what we're most familiar with. And the TPK and TCK is what we're still developing. So of course, TPACK is really meant to be a way to help teachers choose tools and align all these tools with your content and your pedagogy and the technology and how they interplay with each other to increase student motivation. So the theory is really, once all these things kind of align and play nice with each other, your student motivation is going to go up, because really you're using a lot of active learning techniques when you use TPACK as a guide. And of course, doing those two things really provides a lot more accessibility to the content that you're teaching to your students as well. And so it's more relevant to them. It makes sense to them, and it draws the students in. So content, it's based on your discipline, pedagogy, like I mentioned, your learning activities, and then of course the technology tools come last. So I've already mentioned a lot of these things already. I got a little ahead of myself on the last slide. Used in the lesson design process. One of the detractors or the criticisms of TPACK that a lot of people say, oh, it's teacher-centered because it's what do teachers do in choosing the technology, what learning activities teachers are choosing based on the content that they're covering. But really it is focusing on supporting student learning. It helps teachers focus on enhancing student learning as well, where all of the pedagogy based on the content and then the technology based on the pedagogy and the content, the focus is to, all right, what are my students going to get out of this? How is it going to make them active learners? How is it going to make the content more accessible? How is it going to enhance the content, enhance the learning activity? And so really, yeah, in the design process, the teacher's doing all the work, but the student learning is the true focus. And of course, used in reflection, that's another reason why it gets a little bit of a criticism, because that's, again, what teachers are doing. But again, students are the focus. So these are some initial questions to ask yourself And first and foremost should be that top one. How does the technology support teaching and learning? If you can't answer that, or even have an idea of how to answer that, or you're not quite sure, it's probably a tool that that isn't appropriate for the content, or isn't appropriate for the learning activity you've chosen. And so that's really where you need to start. So whether it's an iPad or an app on the iPad, you need to have a clear picture, clear understanding of how this is going to support your teaching and how it's going to support and enhance your student learning. What are others doing? A lot of teachers ask their colleagues for ideas. A lot of teachers go online. A lot of teachers go online to find answers to their questions. And so, or ideas, my email ding went off and it threw me for a loop. Sorry. And so, but seeing others model the technology tools and giving feedback, whether it's on a teacher's blog or Common Sense Media and their Graphite page, which recommends apps for the different grade levels, or the University of South Florida's technology integration matrix, and pulling ideas out of there. At least you're seeing that others, maybe not your colleagues, but other teachers modeling the use of this technology. Edutopia or EduCause or Kathy Schrock's Guide to Everything. There's a lot of resources out there, but at least you're seeing how others are using them. The Nerdy Teacher blog, who's a teacher up in Michigan. Those are just a few examples. Seeing others model in meeting their own instructional goals using a tool that you're interested in using for your own class can really be the tipping point in convincing you that, hey, yes, this can be an educational tool I could use. Does it enhance interactivity? We've mentioned that already. How easy it is for you and your students to use the technology. Apps on phones or iPads can be really easy to use, or they can be kind of tough and confusing to use. Like if you're doing some 3D design using 123D Design from Autodesk, they have an iPad app for it, and it's kind of clunky. It's a pain in the butt. I much rather prefer the desktop version. And if the desktop version is easier to use, do you need to then some time management, some classroom management comes into play. Do I need to pick up my class and go to a computer lab to use this technology effectively? So there's a lot of different offshoots to that question as well. How accessible is it? Is it a free download? Is it only for iPads? What if you, does it work across devices? If you're in a bring your own device district, does it work on Apple, Android devices? Can it work on smartphones very well? Or is the screen too small for it to be easily used on a smartphone? So there's a lot of questions that come out of there. Technology cost effective, and to most teachers that means, is it free? And then there's some deeper questions we need to ask ourselves as well, especially when it comes to privacy and security. This is it's kind of surprising, but it's a very important concern to your students. even more so than it is to some teachers, at least from what I read in the news and from what I read on teachers' blogs and the like. Do your students need an account? If yes, what kind of information does the service ask for? This is especially important for apps on mobile devices, because some apps, like I have a Euchre app on my phone, but it asks one of the permissions I need to grant it in order to use it. And I love Euchre, so I let it do it. It wants to read all of my contacts in my contact list. It has really no business doing that in order to work effectively, but hopefully the company doesn't spam all my friends. And if they have, well, my friends haven't noticed yet, so I haven't gotten any nasty emails from them. Terms of service, can they legally use the site, especially if you're working with the elementary crowds? Can you use Google Docs? If you don't have a district-wide account for Google Apps for Education, or even a school-wide account, because in order to get a Gmail address, you need to be at least 13 years of age. Same thing with, there's an age limit for Twitter if you want to use that in your classroom as well. And so there's some legal issues there as well. Terms of service, another thing is who owns the copyright on those terms of service? Or who assumes ownership of something that's created within that app or using that tool? Do the students, do they retain ownership, or does it transfer to the maker of the app, or the owner of the app? And so that's a huge concern as well, especially if we want to encourage students to create and then share their creations outside of the classroom, outside of the school, outside of the district or county. They might not be able to do that, and it might cross legal boundaries because they give up their copyright. Compatible with existing tools, mentioned that already. And I already talked about some easily archived or easily shared as well. And that's in most things nowadays, kind of, they want people to share what they've created using their app or their hardware or their software, because it's a really good advertising tool. But it's still a concern that we need to think about. So some TPACK questions, going back to that to help you design your lessons. How am I as a teacher going to use this tech tool? And so just focusing on your knowledge of the technology first. This is after you've written out your objectives. This is after you decided on your learning activity. This is after you've already created your assessment and outcomes, analyzing, all right, what tech tool or what tech resource am I going to use? So how am I going to use it as a teacher? How familiar am I with it? Are my students familiar with it? Is there going to be, getting ahead of myself. And then how does the technology and the content play together? How is this technology tool going to enhance the content? Chuck asked a really good question. How do we determine compatibility before using or selecting for a class? Sometimes if you have multiple devices, unfortunately I don't have multiple devices. All of mine are either PC or Android. My phone is Android, and I've got Microsoft products here I don't have any Apple products. I could borrow my wife's iPhone to see if it works on there. It's determining that compatibility. Sometimes it's asking friends for a little bit of help, I think, or asking your students for a little bit of help, just to see if it does work across across devices. And it may even come down to saying, hey, we're going to implement this. Sometimes you just don't know. You know that an app is available on Google Play and then also in the Apple App Store. And if anybody uses the Amazon store, they can use it there or download it from there as well. You just might know. You could just run a test run or a test drive before you implement it in class and say, hey, can you guys check this out for me? I think there's just some simple things like that you can do to determine that compatibility across devices. Phase 3, the tech and the pedagogy. Does this tech tool fit with the learning activity? Does it complement your students' technological capabilities? Are they pretty tech savvy and pick up on things fairly quickly? Or not everybody does. So, all right, can you identify beforehand who those students are that might struggle a little bit? And so you can kind of hone in and focus on them to help get them up to speed. And of course, when you do that, and help the students with lower technological capabilities, how are you going to manage the students who are running light speed ahead of everybody else? And then the last phase is just kind of bringing everything together. And this is the real kicker, and the biggest challenge. And I'm working on this right now with a 3D printing class that I'm developing for some high school seniors this summer. How do you structure activities in a way that students can learn to use the technology while enhancing the content? If you guys have an answer to that, please let me know. I will be all ears. And so my job for this class that I'm developing is to teach them the history of 3D printing, its applications in industry, in business, how it can impact industry and business in the present and in the future. But how can I kind of intertwine everything so they can learn how to use a 3D printer and learn how to use 3D modeling software while I'm teaching them some of the content. So it's a challenge that plagues every teacher, I think, and I don't know of a teacher who gets to that point on the first try. It's a lot of trial and error. Another question, and this is, kind of a question that kind of aligns and brings to mind the SAMR model. What is the content you will be able to teach that can't be taught without this tech tool? Kind of that redefinition, doing something that you couldn't use before. So being able to answer these questions, whether in the lesson design process or in the reflection of your own teaching, that's kind of the ideal that TPACK shoots for, or that ideal that it hopes teachers will aim for in their own teaching. A lot of the choosing, kind of switching gears now into choosing and evaluating tools, especially the choosing part. That's kind of, a lot of them deal with rubrics, or give you rubrics as examples. So Kathy Schrock's Guide to Everything, she's got rubrics. download a file and say, all right, here's the title of the app, the cost, the size, creator, content areas, grade levels. And so there's just kind of this checklist of this can be used on the front end in the lesson design process or in the back end with the reflective process, because I don't think you can answer all of these right away in the beginning. As a section here for standards alignment, a quick summary of the app. But the problem with some of these evaluation forms and the rubrics that you'll see, they do somebody else created them, and so they might not exactly fit what you're looking for. But I do recommend for iPad tool rubrics, I think Kathy's the way to go if you want to look at some pretty good models or examples, because she does focus on the quality of and the learning value in these content tools and web creation tools specifically for iPads. She does pay special attention to factors that could distract your students during the learning activity, the quality of the content or instructional materials, and also the ease of use of the features. So it's a pretty good tool. It's a good place to go and start. Let's look at another one, the research guide. That is not the one I want. This is the one I want. So this is the creation tool. The first one I showed you was the content. This one's the creation. Are you able to import, export, easily share it beyond the classroom? Can you collaborate with it? So these, the content and then the creation evaluation form right here would be very helpful on the front end, and then while you're deciding to choose a tool in the lesson design process. The Web 2.0 selection criteria. This comes from a university up in Canada. Just some more basic questions. Very similar to some of the questions that I had asked earlier for privacy and intellectual property. They do go into a little more detail in some of the questions. Asking, does the tool allow you to determine the copyright status of the content you've created? Can you save a copy of it to your desktop or your mobile device for archival purposes? And of course, I like how they throw in the fun factor as well. Are you allowed to be creative during the learning process? The link to Kathy's site and to all of these are within the in the slides, in the Google Slides that I had shared with you. So I can actually, I'll kick it over here. There's Kathy's site. And I've linked to everything. Everything that's orange within the presentation is all, it's a link to an outside site. And of course, Kathy does a great job. I've seen her talk at conferences. Her site is really comprehensive. It covers a lot of things. But there are other tools out there, and not just Kathy's, not just these links that I've given you. They're not the final say on how to choose or evaluate tech tools. And even what I'm telling you isn't the final say. I learn something new every day and even for most of my presentations that I give throughout the year for the Teacher Toolbox series, I'm working on that presentation up until almost the last minute. This one by Troy Vincent is really interesting because it gives you a number of different things to look at. And it links out to outside papers as well, and other people who have offered their expertise and commented on how to evaluate and choose tools in different settings. So there's a couple different rubrics on here: education app, evaluation rubric. Here's a checklist. Here's a link to Kathy's evaluation tools, another review, and so on and so forth. Here's one for special needs students. Just another resource that you could use as you develop your own lessons or reflect after the fact. Here's a web page rubric. This might be, here's one from North Carolina's Department of Public Instruction. On evaluating Web 2.0 tools. The checklist applies to web tools and web pages, which is kind of nice. It kind of cuts across a couple different things. And really, when you're evaluating web pages and other websites, focus on the validity and the quality. You could also, and it just depends on what you need to focus on for the content you're trying to get across, and of course the type of student you're working with in the grade level. An alternative source is just another rubric. For doing web pages, there's also the students love it because of the acronym. If you just Google crap test for, and I'll pop up the first link here: currency, relevancy, authority, accuracy, and purpose. Students love the acronym, and of course acronyms are always helpful. Somebody threw me an acronym on today's meeting earlier, and so this is, and these are pretty good models as well for evaluating web pages. You may need to adapt them a little bit for depending on your age group that you're working with, but they do come in pretty handy. More rubrics. As I mentioned, I'm not the biggest fan of rubrics because you're defining the criteria of what's important to your students. If you can get your students to be involved in the rubric creation process, that's amazing. Help them define what's important to them. You can kind of guide them in the right direction. And so they can take more ownership over the assignment or the project if they have more say in the assessment process. So those are those. I have to chuckle about the Buck Institute for Education because, and I'll actually show you this page. They have rubrics upon rubrics. They even have a rubric on how to create rubrics. There it is. And so they have a rubric for everything. And really, when it comes to, and I've had somebody from the Friday Institute at NC State say this at in a workshop that I went to not too long ago, that TPACK and project-based or problem-based learning they're almost married. And so what the Buck Institute for Education focuses on, project-based or problem-based learning, it really fits hand in hand with TPACK in helping you create authentic and meaningful learning experiences for your students. And creating rubrics or using some of these rubrics is a small piece of that. So I came across this link here is to an EdSurge article that actually came out just last week. And I kind of summarized it here. Assessing and evaluating the technology after the fact. This, I liked it so much, and other librarians, instruction librarians who teach classes to college students, kind of passed it around to each other and commented on it. And for good reason. It does a very good job of clearly and succinctly summarizing what to look out for when you're evaluating technology. And you can really use this to develop your own action plan on how you are going to evaluate the technology you use in your classroom. So are your outcomes clear? So it's writing for you in the design process. It's writing good, solid objectives and learning outcomes for your students. And then at the end, did this tool help you and your students achieve what you wanted? Does the tech tool, and then moving on to your pedagogical principles, does the tech tool do what it claimed to do? And then does it do it through your students' experience, through your experience? Are there circumstances where this tech tool might work better? Would it fit better with if you're covering different content? Would it fit better with a different learning activity? And so sometimes it's trial and error where, hey, the tech tool says it's going to do this, and you try it that way, you think you have the most appropriate learning activity where it fits, it doesn't, but now that you know exactly what it does, you might be able to find a better fit. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad tool. It just might mean that we made an assumption about what it can do, or we didn't clearly understand what it could do, or your students used it in a way that you couldn't even imagine, and so that's why it didn't fit for the learning activity. Time becomes a factor as well. You need to assess that and evaluate that. Is it a tool that needs to be used more often than a couple times a semester for an hour each time? Does it need to be used constantly, every week, maybe even every day, in order for it to do what it claims it should do for you and your students and impact the learning process? Do classroom management issues come into play? One I had mentioned earlier, can this tool be used on a mobile device in the classroom? Or if you don't have a class set of Chromebooks or a class set of iPads, do you need to get your class up and move to a computer lab to use that tool? And so there's some time management issues as well. And of course, classroom management issues with one thing that a couple of Kathy Schrock's evaluation forms covers distractions. Are there ads that pop up within the app or the other tool? Are your students going to be distracted by those ads, which tend to be kind of flashy and sometimes pop up right in the middle of the screen? Are they going to click on them and then go check that ad out? So there's some issues like that you need to keep in mind. which could take up more time than you had originally anticipated. And then, of course, you need to plan out how are you going to accumulate evidence over time. So I think when it comes to this one, along with having clarity on the outcomes, takes the most pre-planning and organization. How are you going to get formal evidence? Are you going to base that formal evidence on student work or student feedback? Is it just going to be informal talking to students, saying, hey, how does this work? Do you like it? Is it easy to use? Things like that, your own thoughts or observations, and looking at the positives and the negatives of the tool. And so it's a number of different things from a number of different angles, a number of different perspectives, or even talking to your colleagues who have used the tool and say, hey, this is what I've seen, what have you seen? And then comparing and contrasting notes on how it was used in the classroom. But it needs to be done over time. It's not just a one-shot deal, one lesson, one activity, and then kicking an app to the curb if it doesn't meet your expectations. It's got to be done over a long haul in order to figure out, really have a good, solid idea of how it impacts your teaching and how it impacts and enhances the student learning process. So I hope that all makes sense. And sorry for the pause. I went back to the Padlet wall, and everything that was on there disappeared. Wow. But do you guys have any tools that you want to talk about? And we can kind of brainstorm ideas on what questions to ask, on how to evaluate tools, or if there's a tech tool that you're thinking about implementing in your class. We can help you decide if it is the right tool. Hey, my Padlet wall came back up. Evernote, Regina, Evernote's a tool that I use to take notes. I take notes at meetings, at conferences. I could take pictures of things, and it uploads into Evernote. And so really it's helping me at the lower level of blooms on my in my personal life to kind of keep things organized. And it would be something, if it was available when I was in the classroom, I would ask my students to use that to take notes, or if they Google Docs can be used in that way as well to take notes. Although there has been some new research out lately that students, it's been shown that students remember content better if they actually write it out rather than typing. So that would be interesting as well. Although Evernote, on mobile devices, you can actually use your finger and take notes that way. Or if somebody's got a stylus, you can use it like that. Yes, there is an app for it. You can even talk into it and leave leave yourself voice notes. There's a number of different things you can use for it. You can even upload. You can upload images. You can. They have a web clipper where you can save websites into it as well, and so it can be used as a curation tool as well, where you can save things for yourself, but then you can also easily share it via Facebook or Twitter or some other means as well. Preschoolers. That's a good question. I don't know. That might be a little young. That might be a little young for Evernote. I think there's other tools. Let me pull up my cheat sheet here. Let me find it here. Regina, I'm gonna lead you to commonsensemedia.org. It's a nonprofit. It's a nonprofit that has a website for that curates and evaluates apps and movies and other tools for kids. And so there's the link to the apps list. So I would think my background's in high school, with high school students, so I'm not as familiar with the preschool crowd and an elementary crowd. I'm still working on becoming familiar with what's being used at that level. And I think Chuck brings up a good point too, where it's not just university classes that are void of integration of technology and pedagogical principles. There's a lot of miscommunication and misapplication of the two in the K12 system as well, where teachers are getting pressured by administration to integrate technology in the classroom, and so they pick something and say, "Hey, I did it," when it might not be the most appropriate tool for the activity that's being used that day. Any other questions or comments or tools that you're thinking of using but aren't quite sure about? So Chuck, is your comment there of improvement of research and writing, are you looking for something that a tech tool or an app that can help you in that realm? wonder. Oh, thank you very much, Regina. That'll come in handy. I hadn't heard of that starfall before. Yeah, Regina, I'll send once I wrap up here, I'll send everybody an email. Everybody who attended, and actually everybody who registered for the session, a link to the slides, a link to the brief little assessment. So if you do want to get your CEUs, that quick little 3-2-1 assessment kind of acts as that, hey, I did it, I paid attention, and it's just 3 things you learned, 2 things you liked, and 1 thing that you're still not clear about. There are forgot to bring up my list of other reminders that I need to give you guys. So just a reminder, a quick overview of what we covered today. Really just asking yourself some key questions and focusing on, all right, how am I going to use this piece of technology? How are my students going to use it? Does it enhance the content? Does it make sense to use for this learning activity? How am I going to manage students while they use this tool? And then thinking even before you implement it in the classroom, becoming familiar with, all right, how am I going to assess this tool? How am I going to be sure that it actually does have an impact on student learning? So having your good objectives, making sure the tool aligns and helps your students achieve those learning outcomes that you wanted. Does it do what, does the app or tool do what it says it's going to do? Factor in the time, be enough time to implement it properly, and then accumulating some of that evidence over time, whether it's positive or negative through informal or formal channels, to get the feedback you need to make a good quality decision on whether you stick with it because it's a good tool or you need to kick it to the curb and try something else. So like I mentioned, I will email everybody the links. The EdCamp, ECU is coming up with EdCamp on April 23rd. I'll kick you a link for that here as well. That link will also send you to the Eastern North Carolina Instructional Technology Collaborative, which is, it's still in development, but myself and two instructional technology consultants over in the College of Education are working on this thing, and hopefully we can be. It's kind of a grassroots effort to bring the community of educators in Eastern North Carolina together and help each other better integrate technology into the classroom. Chuck, is there anything I can use to help improve their skills? And you do make a good point where pedagogical comprehension is not a problem, or is a problem. You're right. A lot of professors' backgrounds is, hey, you're a TA as a grad student. You take a semester course on how to teach, and then you kind of get thrown into the classroom. And so there's not really, I've read about that quite a bit, where there's not really a good instructor preparation program for grad students. And then that kind of carries over once they get their PhDs and start doing postdoc work or become assistant professors at colleges and universities, where they do what they know, and their only experience is as a teacher is at the time that they were a TA, if they even had that. And so that's a pretty big problem, I think, that higher ed really needs to address, because a lot of professors at the college level teach how they learn best instead of how their students learn best. And I think some of the people who win like the Governor's Award for teaching, think of John Stiller, who won it recently here at ECU. I think Abby Brown in the College of Ed had won it not too long ago as well. Those looking at what those teachers do, and from what I understand, they do a pretty good job of teaching how their students learn best instead of teaching how they learn best. And so that's and when it comes to getting instructors or professors to change in higher ed, it can be a little bit tricky and take a little more time than you'd like, unfortunately. Yeah, that's a problem too, Regina, where the hard stuff comes easy. I mean, like really complicated processes. Like I took, in my own experience, I took an anatomy and physiology class as an undergrad, and the professor was really, really smart, but he couldn't explain the circulatory system worth a lick, and I had to learn the finer details of it from my students, because he understood it, and he taught it the way he had learned it in terms that he had used, and it didn't make a lot of sense to me. So it can be pretty difficult. And Regina, I see your comment on I completely forgot to change that link. It takes you to last semester's evaluation. So after I wrap up here, I'll change the link on the form and send you to the updated one. I see we've gone a couple minutes over, past 4:30. Does anybody have any other final thoughts or questions before I wrap it up? I'll push out the link to the slides one more time. And then I'll share it up on share that front page up on the screen so it has my contact information. Please feel free to email me directly or give me a call if you have any questions, any pressing concerns, or if you just want to talk this topic to death, because there's plenty to talk about and so many different ideas and perspectives on how to choose and evaluate tech tools. I hope I've given you guys a clear picture of how you can do it in your own classroom. So until next time, have a great day, everybody.